Okay, so we're going to start our unit on ratios and proportions. First, we're going to start with ratios. So get your note sheet out, follow along, and complete your notes as we go through them. So let's first talk about what a ratio is. So the definition of a ratio is the amount of one quantity compared to the amount of another quantity. So basically in ratios, we're comparing two numbers, two values. A ratio can be expressed in three different ways. In fraction form, using a colon, or using the word two. Now, once we start looking at ratios, you may remember them. You've done them in 5th grade and 6th grade, and so this really should just be a review. So let's look at an example of what a ratio looks like and how we use it. Here's an example of Mr. Talentino's class. He has 4 girls and 6 boys in his class. So if we use these numbers to develop a ratio, we want the ratio of girls to boys. So let's figure out how to write that. First of all, we can write that in fraction form. We are going to use this word 2 as our guide. So the number of girls is 4. That's going to go on top because that's before the word 2. The number of boys is 6, and that's going to go on the bottom because that's after the word 2. So that would be our ratio of girls to boys in Mr. Talentino's class. But we do need to reduce this into a reduced fraction. So what we're going to do is figure out what number goes into both of them, a number that both of them are divisible by, which would be 2. So if we divide the top and bottom by 2, we end up with 2 over 3, which gives us a fraction ratio of 2/3. Now we need to write the ratio using a colon. A colon is the 2 dots that you've seen before that separates the first part of the ratio from the second part of the ratio. So writing a ratio using a colon looks like this. We're also going to need to reduce this one, and we do it the same exact way. You're going to divide that first number by 2, second number by 2, which is going to give us 2 to 3. And then using the word 2, we're just going to take this situation here and just substitute the numbers in there. So we're going to say 4 girls to 6 boys. And then of course we're going to reduce that as well, and we get 2 to 3. So the 3 ways that you write a ratio are in fraction form, using a colon, and using the word 2. Now, one thing that you saw me do a few minutes ago is to simplify the ratios, and that's really important because ratios are easiest to understand and used when they are in simplest form. So we always want to make sure that we simplify our ratios. One thing that's really important for us to talk about is the difference between ratios versus fractions. Because ratios, when we write them in fraction form, do look a lot like fractions. That's what we're used to looking at and what we're used to seeing fractions in that form. So a lot of times there's confusion. Is it a fraction? Is it a ratio? Well, that's what we're going to figure out now. We're going to talk about that. So we got the fraction 2 girls to 3 boys. And written as a fraction, it looks like 2 over 3. But is this ratio in fraction form actually a fraction? Well, let's go back for a minute and talk about what a fraction actually is. If you remember from our last unit when we talked about fractions, fractions represent a part to a whole. For example, if we're talking about how much pizza is left, if there are 2 pieces out of 6 pieces, then there's 2/6 of the pizza left. That's a part to a whole. If we're talking about what fraction of pieces of gum you have left over from a package, if you have 3 pieces of gum out of 8, you have 3/8 of your gum left. You're always talking about a specific part compared to the whole thing. And that's very different from what we have here with our ratio. The ratio, if you remember from the other definition, is one part of something compared to a different part of something. So ratios are comparing parts to parts. For example, if we have a pizza that has 1 piece left out of 4 pieces, if we wanted to write this as a fraction, it would be 1 piece out of a total of 4 pieces. This would be the fraction. But let's say we wanted to write a ratio from this, and we wanted to write a ratio of the pieces that are left to the pieces that have already been eaten. So this as a ratio written in fraction form would be 1 piece, because there's 1 piece left, over 3 pieces, because there were 3 pieces, 1, 2, 3 pieces that have been eaten. So this would be a ratio because you are comparing 2 parts, the part that was left and the part that's been eaten already, versus the fraction where you're comparing 1 part, which is what's left, to the entire whole pizza, which is a whole pizza of 4 slices. So the question is, the ratio that we developed in the first part, the 2 girls to 3 boys, is that ratio in fraction form actually a fraction? No, it is not. Can you think about why this would not be a fraction, but it is a ratio in fraction form? What is the difference between those two things, and how would you explain it? This ratio is not a fraction because it compares the part of the class that is girls to the part of the class that is boys. It is part to part and not part to whole. Now what we can do is we can turn the part to part ratio of girls to boys into a part to whole ratio, making it into a fraction by doing what? Making a fraction that has the whole class in the denominator. So we would be making it part to whole. So let's go back up and look at the dimensions of Mr. Talentino's class. So if we look at the class below, we want, in words, what part do we want to put on the top of our fraction? Let's choose girls. Well, how would you describe the whole part or the whole class in words? Well, let's just call that girls plus the boys. So if we actually put some numbers in here, how many girls are in the class? So there are 4 girls in the class, so a 4 goes on top to represent the part of our fraction. And to represent the whole, how many whole students are in the class, girls and boys put together, that would be 10. So our fraction to represent the classroom is 4/10. And when we simplify that by dividing the top and bottom by 2, we get 2/5. So this is the difference between writing a ratio and writing a fraction. A fraction is always talking about a part that you are comparing to a whole item. Now, this whole time we've been talking about ratios and fractions that have the same units. So we've been talking about students to students or pieces of pizza to pieces of pizza. Even if it was part to part or part to whole, we've still been talking about the same items. Well, ratios that have different units cannot be converted into fractions. Let me give you an example. So if we're talking about the number of desks per students in a classroom, that is definitely a ratio because you're comparing two items or two quantities, but you're talking about two totally different things. There's no way that you can even figure that desks are at all related to or similar to students. They're two totally different items. So when you have a situation or ratio like this, you cannot convert that into a fraction. There's no way that you can say, you can take the denominator and change it into one whole group of desks or one whole group of students. They don't have anything to do with each other. So let's look at another one. Now these next few are probably things that you've heard of before, and you'll hopefully understand why we can't convert those to fractions. Miles per gallon, two totally different units, cannot be converted into a fraction. Dollars per hour and feet per second. Okay, so let's look at some examples that you can try. These are the first two problems from your ratio worksheet that you will be completing. So make sure that you understand because you will be doing these on your own in just a few moments. So the directions say write each comparison below as a ratio in the three different forms indicated and make sure you convert it to simplest form, always. Then answer yes or no in the last two columns of the table. So we need to write the ratios in fraction form with a colon and with the word to. And then we need to answer the question, is it a fraction or can it be converted to a fraction? So let's start. The first problem says 1 ball to 6 players. So in fraction form, that would be 1 over 6 because 1 ball comes first before the word to, 6 players comes after. That means the 6 goes on the bottom. As a colon, 1 colon 6. Using the word to, 1, 2, 6. Now we have to answer the question, is this a fraction? So if you think back, the difference between a ratio and a fraction is a ratio is comparing two parts and a fraction is comparing a part to a whole. So would this question be considered a fraction? No, it would not, because a ball, whether it be a basketball or baseball, is not the same item as a player. So there's no way that you can take a part and make it into a whole. Can it be converted into a fraction? No, it cannot. Okay, so the second one, it looks like televisions to dog houses. So we have 5 televisions for 3 dog houses. As a colon, it would be 5 to 3. And using the words to, it would be 5 to 3. Is it a fraction? It is not a fraction because this is part to part, not part to whole. And could it be converted into a fraction? No, it cannot, because we cannot change 3 dog houses into one whole group of anything. So let's look at a different example. What if we have 8 boys to 20 students. So to write this as a ratio, you would write 8 over 20 in fraction form. But of course, we have to simplify that. So we can divide the top and the bottom by 4. So 8 divided by 4 is 2. 20 divided by 4 is 5. So in fraction form, we would get 2 over 5. If we write this ratio with a colon, that would be 8 colon 20. And reduced, it would be 2 colon 5. Same thing with the word 2. 8 to 20 and 2 to 5. So, is this a fraction? We have 8 boys to 20 students in a classroom. So yes, actually this would be a fraction because the 8 boys is a part of the whole 20 student body in this classroom. And yes, it can be converted to a fraction.